My sister did everything to erase me from her life and career. She played off my mistakes, turning my future to ashes while basking in gold and praise. But every shining crown has a dark side, and I knew just how to tear hers down. This is the story of how the queen ended up with nothing. But I warn you, it's a lot darker than you can imagine. So my name is Tom. I'm 26, and honestly, there's no one in the world worse than my golden sister Lauren. I'm not kidding. She's 30 and definitely thinks the world owes her something. Just picture it. She's always surrounded by admiring glances and praise, as if every move she makes is a tiny masterpiece. My parents loved to say she was so talented, ambitious, and of course, a natural-born leader. And me? I was always the younger one, who didn't quite live up to expectations. So, there was this perfect picture, and then a tiny crack appeared. That was my entrance onto the scene. I couldn't have guessed that her shine would soon turn into a dusty shadow over me. Landing a position at her company, I was naive, too much so. I thought here was a chance for a young professional to start big. She even supported the idea, smiling as she assured me that working at the company would benefit both me and our family reputation. Like, what could go wrong? Well, I was wrong, seriously wrong. Lauren immediately gave me a project, supposedly a chance to prove myself. Yeah, right. From the beginning, everything went off the rails. Every time I tried to clarify details, she'd throw out bizarre instructions that had nothing to do with the actual work. One moment, she'd insist I finish by the end of the week. The next, she'd extend the deadline another month, but would add more points to the project requirements. Tom, just focus on the task, she'd repeat whenever I tried to understand what they actually wanted from me. In the end, I was on the edge, barely holding myself together. One day, she'd have me running negotiations with a client. The next day, she'd give me a document to prepare, which would then mysteriously vanish from her desk. It was all so twisted, designed to make me constantly look clueless and unprofessional. It felt like a scene from some cheap reality show, where I was the main loser. Then came the day I'll never forget. I get called into the boss's office. A nerve-wracking moment, to say the least. I walk in, and there's Lauren, with tears in her eyes, playing the victim. Masterful move, I'll give her that. She's crying like I single-handedly ruined her life, telling them how she warned me, how I supposedly ignored her advice and led the project to complete disaster. The boss listens to her, nodding, and I can tell the decision was made before I even walked in. And Lauren looks at me with that tiny familiar smirk at the corner of her mouth. Yep, in that moment, my golden sister turned into a real snake. My protest, as you can guess, didn't matter to anyone. No one even tried to listen to my side. Half an hour later, I was already being escorted out of the office, packing up my things under the watchful eyes of co-workers I once thought were my team. Lauren, of course, came out of this as the innocent victim, and only came out stronger and more respected than ever. After I got fired, my life really went downhill. The moment I realized I was without a job and without any prospects, I hit a dark stretch. You know how in the movies the main character thinks they've hit rock bottom, only to find there's an even lower depth to fall? That's exactly how I felt. I tried getting hired, but everywhere I went I heard the same thing. Sorry, we don't have any openings. Oh, come on. You just don't want someone whose sister accidentally described him as a total failure, right? Looks like Lauren didn't just set me up. She was hell-bent on burning every possible bridge I could cross. At first, I thought her scheming stopped with that one job. But no, Miss Golden Sister didn't stop there. Turns out, while I was humbly sending out resumes, Lauren was actively bad-mouthing me, spreading rumors that I was supposedly incompetent, that working with me was like working with a monkey in a suit. Nice, right? Meanwhile, she was cruising through life like it was her personal party. A new car, parties with the trendy crowd, social media posts that practically screamed, "Look at me, I'm the queen of the universe." While she shined, I had to take any job I could just to survive. I started working at a cafe, where I had to smile at every customer, even though I was seething with anger inside. Every single one of her social media posts felt like a slap in the face. I was barely making ends meet, while she flaunted her life like she'd just hit the jackpot. Then one day, by some twist of fate, I ran into her at the cafe. Of course, she had no clue I worked there. She was just stopping by to grab coffee with her friends. I was behind the counter watching as Lauren walked in a perfectly tailored designer outfit, with that signature smug smile of hers. And you know what the funniest part was? She was wearing a shirt that said, "I'm the queen of the world." Yes, Lauren, you are, without a doubt, the queen of my personal universe of hatred. She walked past me without even recognizing me, and I just stood there, watching her back, thinking, of course, the queen of the world, with everything under control. That was the moment I realized. She didn't care at all about what she'd done to me. In fact, it seemed she was proud of herself. After failing several dozen interviews and completely losing faith in people, I had almost resigned myself to the role of a perpetual barista. But then, out of the blue, I got offered a job at a small company. No background checks, no, "Sorry, but you're not a fit." I just showed up, talked to a guy who looked like he'd been through hell himself, and he said, "We'll call you." The next morning, there I was, standing in front of my new office door with one thought. Please, don't mess this up. Yeah, I was worried they'd find out about my reputation or hear something about the failed project from my golden sister Lauren. But it turned out, these guys didn't care at all. To them, I was just another employee who had a job to do. And you know what? This became my chance. It felt like I'd been given another life in this game. I tore into every task like a wolf on its prey, reminding myself every day that I had to prove to myself that I was still worth something. Honestly, no one really doubted me here. After a couple of weeks, they started trusting me with more serious assignments, and I worked like a man possessed. Picture a guy who's running on 4 hours of sleep, fueled by coffee and pure anger. That was me. A few months passed, and finally, they handed me a project rumored to bring in a couple of million for the company. Yes, friends, from a former barista, I suddenly became the guy in charge of a major contract. Inside, I was fired up, thinking, yeah, this is the moment. And I knew that if I could pull this off, all these months of struggle would be worth it. I truly felt like this was my shot to rise up, to prove to myself that I wasn't just some failed office loser. Now imagine, at this very moment, just as I was beginning to find a new footing in life, rumors started reaching me. Lauren's company, apparently, was having problems. Word had it that she was on a downward slope, and a couple of big clients had decided to leave. Well, let's just say, an evil laugh definitely crossed my mind at that moment. My inner voice was practically shouting, "How does it feel, Queen of the World?" With each day, I was hearing more and more about how her perfect empire was starting to crumble. Lauren's reputation, or rather her ego, polished to a shine like a fresh manicure, was cracking. Clients were leaving, and her employees were also beginning to look for work elsewhere. And at some point, I realized her time was running out and mine was just beginning. Once I was firmly settled into my new job, got a sense of the place, and felt like I could finally relax and just be myself. Most importantly, I was no longer haunted by my past mistakes or Lauren's shadow. The new company didn't just take me in, they restored my confidence. And then I realized it was time to truly get even. But not like in some cheap thriller where the hero storms in, smashing everything in sight. No, it had to be subtle, like a surgical operation. And that's when things got interesting. I happened to attend an event where I crossed paths with some former employees of Lauren's and their friends. When the conversation turned to her, I didn't even try to hide my smirk. They shared details, and from the way they looked at me, it was clear they saw me as the guy who knows Lauren's no queen, just an empty shell. Turns out, her perfect leader image was all a big act. Who would have thought? As it turns out, Lauren was actually siphoning money out of the company. That's right, she was stealing, hiding behind her glitzy outfits and flattering speeches. The money went straight into her personal accounts, and whenever something went wrong, who got blamed? That's right, random employees she considered cannon fodder. Lauren was like a circus magician, dazzling management with her flashy ideas, while her hands were busy doing something entirely different. Listening to these stories, I felt my anger boil over. Every new detail just poured fuel on the fire. I mean, I knew she was conniving, but to this extent, every time someone recounted another scandal, I'd mentally smile and think, well, Lauren, you planted this bomb yourself. At that moment, I knew I couldn't pass up this opportunity. Yes, she had ruined my life, but now I had the chance not only to get justice, but to pull her out of her cozy little castle and throw her face first into the dirt she'd created. Now, I didn't just have a motive. I had a real plan for revenge, and I was going to tear her world apart so precisely, she wouldn't even realize what hit her. I started gathering evidence like a detective, searching for every little thing, every tiny detail I could use against her. Every lie has a weak spot, and I was ready to dig up every one of her dirty secrets. Lauren's situation was really spiraling down, like a tire with a slow leak. Clients started leaving, one by one, and her team was scrambling to get out. Honestly, it looked like a bad movie, where the ship is sinking, and the captain just keeps denying it, as if that would change anything. I knew my time had come. Everything was falling apart for her, and I was ready to pour gasoline on the fire. By then, I'd made a few key connections, former employees of Lauren's who she'd also managed to mess over. I organized a small meeting, almost like a secret club for people who had suffered from her royal methods. People showed up, a bit wary, but once the conversation started, it all came pouring out. Each one was more than willing to share how Lauren had practically destroyed their careers, only to sit there afterward with a calm smile, as if nothing had happened. I just kept pouring them coffee, listening, absorbing every fact, every detail that could make her fall even more spectacular. After these meetings, I realized I hadn't just collected dirt on her. I had a whole horror story worthy of a novel. I immediately started spreading the stories among acquaintances and people in her industry. And honestly, it was even easier than I expected. It seemed like plenty of people were just waiting for the chance to hear that the queen wasn't as perfect as she seemed. Who would have guessed all these rumors would actually spread so quickly? Soon, these rumors started reaching her top clients. It was a real blow, one Lauren couldn't recover from. And there I was, sipping my coffee, watching as her every move just dragged her further into the mud. She lost a few major contracts, her revenue was shrinking every day, and her reputation in business circles was destroyed. And me? I savored every moment of it. It was like watching her, crumb by crumb, dig her own grave, while I simply watched as everything crumbled before her eyes. The phone call hit like a bolt out of the blue. My screen lit up with the name of an acquaintance who still worked at Lauren's company. We weren't exactly close friends, but he knew about our, let's say, warm relationship. So when he called, I was a little puzzled. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, wondering what he wanted, but eventually I answered. He didn't even say hello. He just blurted out, "Tom, you won't believe it. She's been fired. Lauren is no longer the company's director." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. I asked, "Are you serious?" On the other end, I heard a small laugh. "Oh yeah, things got so bad for her that even the board decided enough was enough." Imagine. This news was so unbelievable, I could hardly process it. I'd spent months watching her empire crack and crumble, but I never actually thought Lauren would be fired. The queen had finally been dethroned. Then he began sharing the details, like it was the plot of some new drama. Turns out her company was suffering such losses that the board decided not to go easy on her. Her reputation had tanked, the financials were worsening, and employees weren't just leaving. They were running as if from a fire. The board couldn't ignore the chaos any longer. As he put it, they just showed her the door. No ceremony, no second chances. In that moment, I pictured her standing there in her royal suit, stunned and furious, with no idea that her life was unraveling in mere moments. And oddly enough, my first feeling was emptiness. I had spent so many months with one goal, to witness her downfall. And now that it had happened, I realized all my drive had been aimed at this moment. She wouldn't be walking through that office anymore, issuing orders and looking down on everyone like they were her subjects. She wouldn't be feared and admired all at once. The queen, once worshipped in her world, had lost everything that made her great. It turned out there was nowhere left for her to go, and she was left on the sidelines, without fame, money, or status. Her golden life, her dazzling reputation, it all collapsed in an instant. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was only the first act. She had lost her power, but that was just the beginning of my plan. I now had a real opportunity to take over her former company. After Lauren's fall, her company was, to put it mildly, in ruins. She had left behind a post-apocalyptic landscape, everything in disarray, people panicking, and profits deep in the red. So, what do you think happened? They urgently needed a new captain to pull this sinking ship out of the water. And who got appointed to that position? Yes, yours truly. The little helper brother she once so skillfully tossed overboard. Honestly, it felt surreal. I walked into my first meeting as the head of the company, feeling like I was in a movie. Just a moment ago, I was a barista, and now here I was, in the director's chair. But I held my ground, acting as if I'd known from day one that this position would eventually be mine. You see, I'd been through hell and back, and now I had the chance to manage everything that had once been her entire life. It's hard to put this feeling into words, a mix of satisfaction and a kind of sweet sense of freedom. I spent countless hours rebuilding the company. I practically lived at the office, tackling every small and large problem to get things moving again. Day by day, I saw the employees start to see me as a leader, which fueled me even more. Those who used to be too intimidated to even look me in the eye now came to me for advice. This wasn't just about restoring the company's former glory. It was my personal vendetta. Every step I took was like proof, not only to the company but to myself, that I wasn't just her assistant, and certainly not her puppet. And when I finally made it to her old office, I felt a surge of triumph. I sat in her chair, looked around, and mentally asked, "So, Lauren, how do you feel about this? Your little brother now runs what you tossed aside like trash." I knew that neither she nor her royal ambitions could hurt anyone left in the company anymore. I looked at her unfinished plans, the company she'd poured so much into. But unlike her, I wasn't going to destroy it all for the sake of my ego. It was a satisfying feeling, like all the pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. So, the day I couldn't even dream of finally came. Lauren found out that I was now running her former company. She seemed to hope that as the good little brother, I might make some grand gesture of generosity toward her. But I'm no Superman. I'm just a regular guy with a very good memory for petty, nasty details. When she stormed into my office, you'd have thought the fire alarm had gone off. She was furious, confused, and to put it mildly, looking a bit worse for wear. A pathetic shadow of the self-assured queen I was so used to seeing before. Yeah, her crown had definitely fallen, and all that remained of her former grandeur was a memory of its golden shine. It was obvious right away. She hadn't come here for nothing. She'd been driven by a sense of loss so intense that she was willing to burn through the last shreds of her pride. She stood there in silence for a few seconds, as if about to unleash everything she'd bottled up. And it felt childish. For a moment, I felt like I was back in the past, with her as the bossy older sister, and me, the little brother, expected to obey. But no, those days were long gone. I looked at her, realizing that now she was truly alone, without money, without fame, without those who once idolized her and thought she was unbeatable. Then she started, saying something about unfairness, that I was taking advantage of the situation, that treating family this way is low. I listened, barely holding back a laugh. And when her stream of indignation finally ran dry, I looked her right in the eye and simply asked, "So, Lauren, how does it feel to lose everything?" The words came out effortlessly, laced with sarcasm and chill. She went silent, as if she didn't know how to respond. I think that was the moment she realized. Her game was over. Lauren didn't say another word. She just turned and slowly walked out of the office. Her footsteps echoed like a memory of her lost authority, and I watched her leave, feeling all the tension, all those months of struggle and anger, finally slip away. As I closed the door behind her, I felt an absolute sense of satisfaction.